Hey everyone, welcome to this lesson on business finance. Today we'll be covering three objectives. The first one is agency conflicts and problems, the costs of the agency problem, and corporate governance. Okay, we're going to look at these three objectives today. So let us begin. Let's first start by talking about the agency conflicts and problems. So let's try and explain this. We have two parties. Let's say we have two parties. We're going to have the shareholders here. And we also have the financial manager here. Okay, we've got two parties here, the financial manager and the shareholders. Now, generally, there is some sort of connection between the two. Because the shareholders, they want something, and the financial manager more or less wants something for himself or herself as well. But the financial manager has a primary goal. That it should be fulfilling. As soon as there is a conflict in interest, we have something known as the agency problem or the agency conflict. So we have shareholders who want this goal, this decision, this, and this. But the financial manager, on the other hand, starts doing things that may not necessarily be right. It may be dwelling off doing decisions and goals for himself or herself. And this leads to an agency problem. But let's look at the real definition. The definition of an agency problem or an agency conflict is a conflict of interest between shareholders and the financial manager. Straightforward with the diagram. Shareholders, financial manager, something's not going right. And we have an agency problem. And this leads to costs. It leads to costs. Since the financial manager is not working to his most efficient ability, it generates some costs. And this leads on to our second objective, the costs of the agency problem. Okay, the costs of agency problems. So we first have direct agency costs. But let's first look at what a direct agency problem is. The definition of a direct agency problem is when financial managers act in their own self-interest. Okay? And when managers do this, that's going to generate a cost for the organization, for the company. And an example of such a cost are monitoring costs. Monitoring costs. So let's say you have a company, right? And this company starts to become a bit skeptical, a bit worried about the financial manager's performance. Well, they're going to have to get money deep from their pockets and create some sort of a monitoring system to better look for the financial manager and furthermore its company. So in attempt to monitor the financial manager, it's going to have to get into its pockets and dig out money. And this obviously is a cost. The next thing we're going to look at is direct agency costs. Okay, the direct agency costs. Now, an indirect agency problem is when investment opportunities are not pursued. Okay, when investment opportunities are not pursued. Now, let's see exactly what we're saying here. So, we have a financial manager, an FM right here. Now remember, its primary goal is to maximize the current value of existing shareholders. Now, let's say here we have an investment opportunity. Investment opportunity right here. Okay? But this investment opportunity is good for the company. It will maximize the current value of existing shareholders. But the financial manager chooses not to take it. Why? Why would a financial manager do this? Well, here's an example. Let's say two companies merge. So when two companies merge, the financial manager's job isn't so static anymore. His job is at risk. He or her, as a financial manager, runs the risk of losing their job. So at that very instance, the financial manager is going to be like, I do not want to take this opportunity because I do not want to lose my job. Even though this opportunity will better the shareholders as it should, the financial manager is in a way looking out in its own self-interest. Okay, and so that's an example of indirect agency costs. The cost of not taking this opportunity. The next thing we're going to look at is corporate governance. Now, corporate governance alludes on to a system and mechanism used to resolve agency problems. Okay? But let's look at its definition. Its definition is a system by which corporations are controlled and directed. So we have a corporation, but let's establish a system, a bunch of rules that will control and direct your corporation in such a way to resolve the agency problem. Okay, so the corporate governance is a system which manages or which controls the agency problem. That's all you have to remember from that. Now, there are mechanisms within corporate governance used to control the agency problem. The first being internal mechanisms. Okay, and we're going to have a look at some of these internal mechanisms. The first is a board of directors. Okay, a board of directors. So what we're going to have is we're going to have people within the company. Okay, and we're going to get a subset of those people and we're going to call them a board of directors. And their job is to basically monitor the financial director. Keep an eye on the financial director and make sure him or her is doing his or her job. Okay, so that's the board of directors. It's a means of monitoring the financial manager. Next, we have shareholder meetings and voting rights. Voting rights. So basically the shareholders, they have some sort of power in this because they're shareholders. They've put some equity into the company. And so they have some voting rights. They have some power. And they can also meet up and overthrow the financial manager. So that's something that the financial manager has to be aware of. And finally, we have managerial compensation. Okay, managerial compensation. So in this particular point, we basically have a financial manager. And that financial manager has a salary. What you do is you take a bit of the financial manager's salary, you take it away, a bit of it, and you give him or her some stock or some shares from the same company that the manager is running. Now, if the financial manager wants to maximize his or her income, it would make sense that he or her would maximize the value of the shares. But if the financial manager is to do that, him or her would have to work towards maximizing the current value of existing shareholders. Okay? So it works in both ways. By the financial manager working in the shareholders' benefit, him or her will also work in his or her own benefit. Okay? And that's managerial compensation. A very cool way to manage the financial manager. But there are also external mechanisms. External mechanisms. And some external mechanisms include the managerial labor market. Put simply, hey, there are lots of financial managers out there who are willing to do your job. So if you're not going to do your job, I'll just get somebody from the labor market to do it for you. And we also have debt and legal restrictions. Basically, within the company, we have legal and debt restrictions that more or less try and force the financial manager to do their job. And lastly, but not least, we're just covering some of them. We have mergers and acquisitions. Okay, let's talk about this. Mergers and acquisitions. This kind of goes back to when we were talking about a financial manager not taking the investment opportunity that we explained in the last page. Basically, if a financial manager is not doing their job, shareholders can be like, okay, I'm not happy, so I'm going to sell my shares. Sell my shares in the next hostile takeover. Now, this is still elementary finance, so this may be a weird point. But what you have to remember is that if shareholders sell their shares in a takeover, that means the company that's trying to take over will more or less succeed. And if they succeed, the financial manager may lose its job. Okay, so you have two companies. If this one wants to take over this one, it can do it if the shareholders sell their shares. And if that happens, well, the financial manager is put at risk. So let's do a recap of today's lesson. We saw that if we have shareholders and a financial manager and they're not quite complying with each other, we have something known as the agency problem. Next, we have agency costs, and they can be direct or indirect. And finally, we looked at corporate governance, a system, a bunch of systems and mechanisms used to manage. We want to manage the agency costs, and they can either be internal or external. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you next time.